Hey there, welcome back to the channel. My name is Andrew Clark, and in this video, I want to talk about how I use the number system to play in any key. Now, if you watch any of my Find the Chords to Any Song videos, you'll probably be familiar with something I call the chord roadmap. And while I show you one version of that roadmap in those videos, I thought it'd be a good idea to make a dedicated video where I talk about a second roadmap that I use just as often. So as we go through this video, there might be a few concepts that you're already familiar with, but I'd recommend watching those parts anyway, just so that you have all of the context. Now, as we talk about the number system and these roadmaps, I'll be exclusively using bar chords. And I know there are probably some of you guys out there that maybe aren't at the point in your playing yet where you can utilize bar chords. So what I'd recommend is that you still sit through the lesson and go through all the concepts, but then I'm gonna show you how this can apply to the use of open chords along with a capo. That way, no matter where you're at, you'll still get something out of this video. Okay, so first things first, I'm gonna show you the 4 bar chord shapes that you need to know. And for most of you guys, this shouldn't be anything new, but I am gonna go over it really quickly. So our first 2 shapes are gonna be bar chords that are rooted on the low E string. And what I mean by that is the root note of the chord, so the note that shares the same name as the chord, is on the low E string. So for something like a G major chord, that G note would be found on our low E string. And then the same would go for our minor chords. So something like an A minor chord, that A note from the A minor chord would also be found on our low E string. So our major bar chord shape would look something like this. So let's do G major. So basically what we're doing, we're barring right here and we're creating an E major shape. If you're familiar with like your regular E major chord shape, we're using a bar and we're sliding this to wherever we need. So that shape, like I said, you probably should be familiar with it at this point, but if you aren't, that's what it looks like. And then when we want to make it a minor chord shape, we would just remove this one finger, lowering the third of the chord. So as we remove this finger, that would be a G minor chord. So same thing if we want to go somewhere else. If we wanted to find an A note on this low E string right there, well, an A bar chord, an A major bar chord specifically, would be making that same shape with the bar landing with our root note right here on an A note. Same thing would go for minor. An A minor would be in the same place, that A root note, and it would just be the minor shape. And then you would recognize this is an E minor open chord just with a bar, so it's the same shape, just adding the bar on there. Okay, and then the other 2 bar chord shapes you need to know are rooted on the A string. So that means instead of finding our root note on the low E string, we need to find our root note on the A string. If you don't know the note names on the low E and A strings, I do have a video where I show you how to find all the note names on the fretboard, and I'll make sure to link that in the description. Okay, so we pick a note and we find that note on our A string. So instead of our low E string, we're gonna go along on the A string. So for example, let's go with a D note, which a D note is on the 5th fret here of the A string. And then we're basically going to make an A major chord. So just like our open A major chord down here, we're gonna slide all the way up, finding the root note, which this right here is a D, and barring there and playing an A major chord. Like this. I usually prefer to play the shape like this. And I actually just mute this high E string. I find it's not that necessary, but whatever is most comfortable for you if you want to play the whole thing, however feels good. But this is our A major chord shape. So this here would be a D major chord. And then to make that minor, we actually have to change the shape, and it's going to feel a little bit like the shape that we used before on the low E string for the major. So it's easy to get them mixed up, but because of the tuning of the B string, we have to compensate for that. So the shape is going to look very similar, but everything is up a string. But this becomes a minor. So even though this is major, looks very similar, when we're uprooted on the A string, this is a minor shape. So now instead of D major like this with an A major shape, we make an A minor shape with the bar here, and we've got a D minor chord. Now, just like with our low E string, we can find any note anywhere on that A string and create our bar chords from that. So if we want to find, here's an F up here on the 8th fret, we've got an F major chord. You could play it down here on the low E, but we can also play it rooted right here with a little A major shape. And then we can play an F minor by doing our minor shape. Okay, so we've got our chord shapes. Now we got to do a quick little theory lesson. This is another concept where if you've watched my other videos, you're going to be very familiar with it already, but it's how we give numbers to each chord inside of a key. So any major key comes right from a major scale. If you need a deeper dive on this stuff, make sure you check out this video. It will also be linked in the description, but we're gonna start with our C major scale like we always do. C, D, E, F, G, B, A. Now we're gonna give each one of those notes a number, and no matter which major scale we're using, we would always give the same number. So if we did a D major scale, if we did a B flat major scale, it wouldn't matter, we'd still use the numbers 1 through 7. Now from that numbered C major scale, we can also get all the chords inside the key of C major, and we get those chords by applying the major minor formula, which means that our 1, 4, and 5 chord are major, our 2, 3, and 6 chords are minor, and our 7th chord is diminished. And this would give us every single chord that exists naturally inside the key of C major. So looking at all the chords here, if I even played them as open chords so that you can kind of really internalize it. And then the same would go for finding the chords to any other keys. So for example, the key of G major, we would have the notes G, A, B, C, D, E, F sharp, and then we can number those and add our major minor formula to those as well. Again, all of that just stemming from our G major scale. So then we end up with these chords. Okay, so hopefully that's making sense so far. Like I said, I've linked some other videos if you need a little bit of a deeper dive on these topics. But now we're gonna get into our chord roadmap. So the first one is one I talked about in my Find the Chords to Any Song video, and that one utilizes our low E string root note. So if we had a key like G major, we would go along our low E string and find a G note. So we've got E, F, F sharp, and then G right here on the 3rd fret. So this is gonna be the root note. So key of G major, we found a G note. Now remember back to our 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 chords, all of those chords have a corresponding number, right, inside of each key. So the root note and the number for each chord is gonna look like this. We've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and 7 is here, but we're not going to worry about that at all for this lesson. And then what we can do from there is use our bar chords and the major minor formula that we're already familiar with to create chords for this key. The only important thing you need to remember is which number is major and which number is minor, and then the 4 bar chord shapes that we talked about earlier in this video. So we've got G right here. G major is the first chord in the key of G major. So we do a major bar chord shape rooted on the low E string. That gives us our 1 chord. Now when we go to 2 right here, it's a minor chord. 2 and 3 are minor. So we do our minor shape. So we remove this finger. We get an A minor. Now our 3 chord. Right there, also minor. Then we go back up here for our 4 chord. So this C note, which is the 4th note in the G major scale, and our 4th chord in the key of G major, right here, it's major chord. So we get C major, so we make a major shape based on that root note. There we go, C major. Then our 5 chord is also a major chord right here, and that shape is gonna be the exact same. And then lastly, we're gonna go up to our 6 chord here, and because our 6 chord is always minor, we have to do a minor chord shape. It's gonna look like this. This is our root note right here. 6th note of the scale, right? G major scale right there. It's a minor chord shape, so we've got... Now we can keep going to our 7th chord right here. I'm not gonna show you that shape because it really isn't the most useful thing ever, and I just kinda wanna keep things simple. I'll touch on it in a future lesson, but there we go. So we've got our 1 chord, our 2 chord, our 3 chord, our 4 chord, our 5 chord, and our 6 chord. And as you can see, they're all laid out in a really easy to remember kind of pattern. And that's our roadmap. Now, if we were to go into a different key, we could take that whole roadmap and nothing changes other than the whole thing gets shifted by the amount of frets that you're moving up or down. So if we wanted to do the same thing in A major, we would just start on an A major note and we would still have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. And that would give us the root notes of all of our chords in A major. And then we apply our little formula, same roadmap, same everything. Everything's just shifted. So we have our 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 just like that. As long as you're using the correct bar chord shapes, you got to make sure you're using major and minor in the right spot. But nothing has changed as far as the spacing. So the spacing of the chords is going to remain the same no matter what key we're in. And those 6 chords in each key are actually going to cover the vast majority of popular songs in like the most contemporary styles of music at the moment. But we do run into one little problem, and that is, what if our root note is all the way up here? What if it's a D note or an E flat even, all the way up here? We don't have anywhere else on our low E string that we can play an E flat or a D. Let's do D. So we don't have anywhere else that we can play that. So that means we have to go all the way up to the 10th fret, which is a D note here, and we have to play all these little shapes. So we've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. And that's just not realistic. I mean, if you have an acoustic guitar, it's definitely not realistic. But even on an electric guitar, it's not always going to be the most useful. But what we can do now is we can learn a second roadmap where the root note of our key, so if it's the key of D major, the D note, instead of finding that on the low E string, we can find it on the A string. So what that means is, instead of playing a D all the way up here, we can play a D here on the 5th fret of our A string. Now, obviously, we can jump up from there, so we can do 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 as our root notes of our chords, which looks very similar to the roadmap we already know. The problem is, when you start making bar chords rooted here, you have to learn whole new shapes. So instead, we're actually gonna kind of flip things over. And so what I mean by that is, this is still 1, 2, 3. So that's gonna be the same on the A string, but instead of going up here for 4, 5, 6, right above, we're gonna go onto the low E string to find our 4, 5, 6. Now, it's not directly below, but it's below and back 2. So this is gonna take you some time to memorize probably, but basically what it is. So there's our 1, our 4 is below and back 2. So this is our 4, this is our 5, and this is our 6. So now it looks a little different. We've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So again, we're thinking in numbers and we're applying that major minor formula here again. But obviously we're starting on the A string this time, so we're using our bar chords rooted on the A string. So we've got our 1 chord, which is major, 1, 2, minor, 3, minor. And now for our 4, instead of going up above the 1, we're gonna go below the 1 and back 2 frets to find our 4. So our 4 is here and it's gonna be major. And you already know this shape right here, G major is right here. And then we move up 2 frets to our 5. So that's the same. So 4, 5, 6, 4 major, 5 major, and then 6 minor right here. And then for reference, our 1 is back here. So everything gets shifted 2 frets for that 4, 5, and 6, but it still lines up pretty nicely. All of the gaps are kind of the same, so it's pretty easy to memorize this one. Okay, now let's do the same thing for the key of C major. Now, C major is a super popular key. You're probably already using open chords for it, but if you're applying the roadmap, you'd be in a little bit of an uncomfortable position. So you'd be playing in the key of C major all the way up here. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Which is not necessarily the most ergonomic way to play. So what we can do instead is, instead of our C note here, we've got a C note right there on the 3rd fret, and we can apply our second roadmap from there. So we know we're in the key of C major, we've got our C note, the root note, and what we call the tonic of the key is C. So there we go right there. We've got C, 1, minor 2, 3, and then below the 1 and back 2 is our 4, 5, and 6 right there. And you can see maybe it's a little bit awkward, right? Especially going all the way from the 3 to the 4. But you gotta remember that the most used chords in pop music are the 1, 4, 5, and 6. So most of the time it's gonna be pretty comfortable because it's gonna be more like in a 1, 5, 6, 4. It's gonna be like. So now with that second roadmap, we have a really comfortable place to play in any key. And it's just up to you to decide which of the 2 roadmaps is gonna feel the most comfortable for the song that you're playing. And also, this is gonna give you kind of a home base for every single key that you're playing in. So let's say you wanna throw in some new chord shape. You wanna try out a new little lick. You wanna try out an open chord, maybe mix that up in there. You're still always gonna have something that you can fall back on, which is why I really suggest committing this to memory and muscle memory more importantly, so that when you are trying to add new things, you always have somewhere to kind of fall back to and be comfortable and still be playing the correct chords. These two roadmaps make it really easy to add little licks in between your chord changes as well. You kind of think like a Jimi Hendrix or John Mayer thing where you'd play a chord, then play a little lick, and then land on the next chord and be able to have the freedom to do that. These two roadmaps are going to be the easiest way to start getting into that. And if that is something you're interested in, please let me know, because I can make a video on linking chords together with licks. And being able to relate all these chords back to a number is actually really helpful even when you start talking about non-diatonic chords as well. So for example, if we're playing a chord progression that includes a non-diatonic chord, obviously it's not going to have a corresponding number. Non-diatonic meaning it's not one of the chords that occurs naturally inside of a key. What we can do is we can use our numbers to communicate how that chord operates inside of our key. It sounds confusing, and it's something I plan on doing a whole video for, non-diatonic chords, in the future. But just to kind of give you a quick example, if we were playing in the key of C major, so one we're comfortable with, maybe with our new roadmap, a really popular chord progression is actually to go from C major down here to a B flat major, and then down to an F. So we've got our first chord, which is the C major in the key of C major, is a 1 chord. And then our next chord in the progression is a B flat major. Now that doesn't naturally occur, so we look at the note next to it, the chord next to it, which right here is this B, the 7th chord, which is our half diminished chord in the key of C major. And we name it based off of that. So this would be our flat 7 chord. And then we go down to the F, which is another naturally occurring, a diatonic chord in the key of C major, which is our 4th chord. So we've got our 1, then we've got our flat 7, and then we've got our 4. So a lot of people would say, oh, this chord progression is a 1, flat 7, 4 in the key of C major. And if we played a 1, flat 7, 4 in another key, it would sound the same. That would just be based on the root note here. So this would be an E. So we've got an E major, which is our 1 chord. And then our flat 7 would give us a D major, which doesn't naturally occur in the key of E major. So flat 7. And then down to our 4 chord, which is an A major, which does naturally occur in the key of E major. And we just call that a 1, flat 7, 4 in the key of E major. So I'll give you one more quick example using the number system with a non-diatonic chord. And a really popular one is something called a major 2 chord. And if you think back to our major minor formula, our 1, 4, and 5 are major, and our 2, 3, and 6 are minor. So this would just mean that we are putting a major 2 chord inside of the key. So a good example of that, if I'm playing the key of G major, so I've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and let's say I want to play 6, and then I want to play 4, and then I'm going to play a 2, but I'm going to play it major this time, and then I'm going to play a 5. It's going to sound like this. If we were to communicate this chord progression to another musician, we would say it's a 6, 4, major 2, 5 in the key of G major. Now, a quick side note, if you're wondering about minor keys, I just made a video talking all about minor keys. It'll also be linked in the description. So if that is a question you're asking right now, make sure you go check it out. Spoiler, it's a whole lot more simple than you probably think. So one last thing I wanted to touch on in this video is for the people that can't play bar chords yet or aren't comfortable using them yet, this whole number and roadmap system can still apply to you. We can use open chords to do the same thing. We just have to make use of a little tool like this, which is called a capo. I'm sure you have one. And what we're gonna do is we're gonna use the chords from 2 open keys instead. So the key of G major and the key of C major. So the key of G major has open chords in it, right? You're probably familiar. You've got your 1, you've got 2, you've got 3. This one is a bar chord. You're not using your 3 chord that much, so it's okay. You've got 4, 5, and 6. Now, the important part to look out for is that 1 chord being a G major and the root note of that 1 chord, that G major chord, which is right here on our low E string. So yeah, we're not making a bar chord for it. We're playing it open like this. Now, if I were to play a 1, 5, 6, 4 in the key of G major with open chords, it would look like this. 1, 5, D major, 6, E minor, then a 4 is a C. So. But if you want to play a 1, 5, 6, 4 in a different key using those open chords, you can obviously use a capo. The only thing you need to pay attention to is that root note of our 1 chord. So this 3rd fret of the low E string is a G. G chord. Makes sense, right? But what if I play a G chord all the way up here on the 8th fret, right? If I were to play a G chord here, obviously it's going to sound weird because the open strings don't make sense. So we use our capo to compensate. So let's add our capo, where it would sit as if these were open chords. So this might be a little out of tune, but that's okay. So now our root note of our G chord is right here. So we could play the same chords and do a 1, 5, 6, 4. And we'd still have our other numbered chords from that key as well if we wanted to use those. But our root note of that G chord, of that 1 chord, is no longer a G, right? Because it was a G when it was down here. So what note is this that it's on? Well, it's the 8th fret, and it is a C note. So what that means is this chord now is a C major chord. So that means I could play a 1, 5, 6, 4 in the key of C major. And you'd also have your 2 chord and your 3 chord. And you can do that in any key with those same chords, just depending on where you put that low root note of that G chord, of that 1 chord. So if we moved this, let's say, all the way up here, our root note for that G chord, to sound good, is all the way up here. Well, what note is that? Well, it's an E note. So I can play a 1, 5, 6, 4 in the key of E. Listen to that, 1, 5, 6, 4. And again, I can play that 1, 5, 6, 4 in a whole bunch of different places, but you who can't play bar chords, you can still utilize the number system and play in any key. Now we can do the exact same thing because that was kind of a little bit awkward to put our capo all the way up on the 9th fret like that. We can do it based on the chords in C major. So when we play the chords in C major, our 1 chord is a C major. You probably know that chord, a C major chord. And the root note here is on the A string, right? Because we mute that low E string for the 1 chord. So instead of our root note being here, our root note is here. And the chords in C major, you should be familiar. 1, 2, 3. Then we've got the F. If you can't play the bar chord version, I play with my thumb, but if you can't do that, you can do the little one. This one here, F, G, and then A minors are 6. So all open chords you're familiar with. Again, all we're looking for is that 1 chord root note on the A string, and we find the note name of any key. So let's say we want to play again in the key of E major. Let's look along our A string until we find an E note, which is right here on the 7th fret, and we're going to make that C major chord shape from that 7th fret. So right here, if I played it, ooh, terrible. But we use our capo, and we put that right here, which is the spot that it would go for that chord to make sense. And because this is an E note, even though we're playing a C shape, this becomes an E major chord. So that's our 1 chord. So now, if we wanted to play a 1, 5, 6, 4 in the key of E major, we can play it using open chords from the key of C major. So C major chord, 1, 5, 6, 4, like that, or that little F if you'd rather do that. And I can find a different root note. Let's say it's a bit of a weird key. Let's say we want to do F sharp major or something like that. Well, where's an F sharp note? Okay, I'm going to go all the way along, right there on the 9th fret. So we build our little C chord. Doesn't really work with the capo there. I mean, it still kind of sounded cool, but we slide that up so that the C chord makes sense. So there we go, 1, 5, 6, 4. And just like that, you've got your own version of a movable roadmap that you can use to play the chords in any key. Okay, so that's gonna do it for this video. Even though I've talked about this stuff before, I really felt like it deserved its own dedicated video. And hopefully having access to these roadmaps is really gonna help you internalize the whole idea of the number system. If you have any questions for me, please make sure you leave those in the comments below. And with that, thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.